Okay, I think we're good. There you go. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for coming today. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Kelvin Chin. Kelvin is Executive Director and founder of the Turning Within Meditation and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation, and is an internationally recognized meditation teacher featured in Business Insider, Newsweek, Tiger Health News, and has taught meditation at West Point and in the U.S. Army, including in the DMZ in Korea. Kelvin has been meditating for 54 years and has taught meditation for 51 years to thousands of people in over 60 countries. He also had a career in legal services as a VP with the American Arbitration Association and is a senior executive in global law firms. He has been a speaker at more than 100 conferences spanning a wide range of topics. He is a graduate of Dartmouth, Yale, and Boston College Law and has lived in 7 countries. Kelvin is the author of 3 books. All his books are non-religious, and each one focuses on how to live with greater happiness and less fear. And those 3 books will also be on sale today after the presentation. I believe they're $10 a piece. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kelvin Chin.
Thanks very much, Chelsea. Thank you, Chelsea. It's great working with Chelsea. She did a great job organizing this. Really appreciate her help here at the library here in North Bergen, New Jersey. Great to have a nice crowd here to discuss these ideas we're going to get into today about death and dying. We're going to get into this in some detail, and as you saw on the flyer, I take a non-religious approach to discussing these ideas, and I embrace everybody's religion, their cultures, and whatever their belief systems are. And I'll describe to you in a second the 4 belief systems that we're going to talk about, the lens we're going to look through this idea about death and dying and overcoming our fear of death in particular in a minute. Before I do that, I just want to just introduce all 3 of my books. So I have 3 books, and here on the stand here, and as Chelsea said, if you're interested in purchasing one or more of the books at the end, I'm just charging $10 flat fee. So it's about half what you would pay on Amazon with shipping and tax and all that other stuff, you know. So the book we're going to talk about, this is the one we're going to talk about today, right? Overcoming the Fear of Death. This is the first book I wrote about 8-9 years ago, okay? And I'm going to get into like why I wrote this. I'll tell you that in a second. But this is my second book. I wrote, now it's, time flies, right? 3 years ago, 2021, this book came out. Now, this is a collection of 67 essays that I wrote. It's called Marcus Aurelius Updated 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. And so the idea of these 67 essays in here, they cover emotions, life principles. There's a chapter on meditation principles. It's not a teaching chapter of how to meditate, but it's about principles that I talk about. And there's a chapter on spiritual topics. And again, I use that word spiritual, not religious, because you'll see what I mean if you look at this book, you look at the table of contents and so forth. Topics like self-interest is a spiritual topic. It's how do we take care of ourselves? You know, topics like free will, choice. Free will means choice, decision-making, choices that we can make in our lives. That's also a spiritual, kind of more holistic topic. It cuts across all cultures and all religions and so forth. What about the idea of life purpose, the meaning of life? Those kinds of topics is stuff that I cover in this book in the spiritual section. Dualism versus non-dualism, karma, the idea of karma, you may have heard of that idea, and so forth. The concept of eternity. So I talk about that. So I get into some pretty heavy topics in here, and then there's some other just, you know, emotions, suffering and happiness, success and happiness. So very practical stuff. You know, how to look at these things. Friendship. You know, crying is not weakness. That's another essay in here. The nuances of forgiveness. How do you forgive somebody who may have hurt you? And how can you move on from that? And what do I mean by forgiveness? I'll just give you the short version of this. It doesn't mean giving somebody a hall pass. It doesn't mean saying, hey, you hurt me, that's okay. Okay, it's not okay that you hurt me. Okay, so that's the short version. But you can move forward, and you can't forgive and move forward, but you never forget. You ever heard people say that, forgive and forget? Baloney. Nobody ever forgets, okay? Who forgets? Nobody. Grieving. What about grief? Cruelty. I talk about bullying and cruelty and why it happens. Why do people do it? And then how can you deal with it if you're the victim of it, etc. So that's just a few of the 67 topics that I talk about in this book. So it's a very practical book. This is my death and dying book. This is my living life book. They're very different, okay? I don't have anything in here about death and dying specifically, and I've written a lot about death and dying. And you'll see that on some of my websites that you guys have my business card of. But this is not that, okay? This is how can we live our lives more practically with less suffering, more happiness. Okay, this book is my most recent book, came out last year. About a year old, came out, I think, March or April last year. It's about my past life memories. So what? Past life memories? Exactly. That's what I thought when this started happening to me 45 years ago, because I didn't believe in this stuff. I came from a science background. So a little bit about me. Anyway, so this goes back, these are stories that go back, and it's more than stories. It's about how they surfaced in me and surprised me sometimes in very odd situations. And then how did I follow the breadcrumbs that I got over, it's now 45 years. And so how did I follow the breadcrumbs and figure out that that actually was not just an imaginary thing, because we have imaginations too, right? Like fantasy. And so how did that kind of pop up? And then I figured these out. So, you know what triangulation means? You get this idea and you get this idea and you get this idea and you put them together and you go, oh, they actually go together. That kind of stuff. So I get into some detail in here about how I figured out some of these memories that for me at first were just like, thought I was making it up. Okay, seriously. This is my past life memory book. And this is my 67 Essays on Living Life book. And this is the book we're going to talk about today, Overcoming the Fear of Death. So just before I jump into the discussion about overcoming the fear of death, yes, my memories go back 6,000 years. Yes, I did not believe in reincarnation when this started happening. I come from a science background. I was pre-med at Dartmouth. I changed out of pre-med, but I came from a very science-oriented background. So, prove it kind of thing. It's my mentality, right? Give me the evidence at least. If you can't prove it, what's the evidence and how reliable is the evidence? So that's kind of how I think, and I still think that way, even though I went, as you heard in my bio, I went became a lawyer and so forth, so on. So I didn't stick with the science thing, but my thinking is still that way. It's the way I think, right? Give me the evidence. Let's figure this out. So even in this book, I give as much evidence as possible. I'm very candid about what I know and what I can give evidence on, and I'm candid about what I cannot. And so, and I'm not here to persuade people to believe that, oh, I was that person, this person. I'm here to teach. So let me just say this couple of general things, and then we'll dive into the topic today. And by the way, I only want to talk for 20 minutes or something, and I want to open up the questions and then see where it goes, okay? Because I'm here for you guys. And yes, I have people on Facebook Live and on Zoom and so forth, and they're kind of watching, but mainly this is for you guys here, okay? Interaction. So my approach is, I am a teacher. I am not a guru. So here's what that means. I teach students to think about ideas in different ways. And you do not have to believe the way my approach in thinking about those ideas either. A teacher teaches, a guru wants followers. That's the distinction for those of you who don't know that terminology. A guru wants followers. They want, and they're good. A guru is good with the fact that if they're a blind follower and they don't follow, they're good with that. They just want a disciple, not me. I'm a teacher. I want students who want to learn and to think independently from me and from anybody else, quite frankly, because we're all on our own journeys, in my opinion. That's my experience. My memories go back 6,000 years so far, a couple of dozen different lifetimes. My experience is that we're all on our own journeys and we're all trying to figure stuff out. And so I have been a teacher various times, pretty much all the time, because that's one of my personality traits. Even if I wasn't labeled a teacher in that lifetime, I come from that perspective. And I try to help people move forward in their own respective lives, whatever that means for them, right? So that means that helping people look at themselves and look at their surroundings and their environment and the relationships that they have, interact with people, and learning from that. Because last time I checked, self-development, the key word in the self-development is self, and personal development is personal. It's you, it's me, it's each of us as an individual who's growing, and we need to each figure it out. So to whatever extent I can help people, that's my goal in the way I teach, right? Look at it this way, maybe look at it that way. Think about this from take a different approach to that issue. That's what we're going to do today when we're talking about overcoming the fear of death. Okay, that's my overall 100,000-foot view of how Kelvin Chin views his role in helping people think a little bit differently. Okay, so this book, as I said, I wrote it about 8-9 years ago. But I started getting into helping people with death and dying many, many decades ago, long before I wrote this book. Okay, so what propelled me, what inspired me to start getting into this area and helping people with death and dying is the death of my mom. And my mom died very young. She was only in her 50s when she died. I grew up in Boston. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up in a suburb of Boston and so forth. She was gone very quickly. She had a very, 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 very advanced stage of cancer, and she was asymptomatic. So nobody knew, at least she told us she was asymptomatic. I mean, nobody could tell. And she slipped down the stairs a little bit. If you know what a split level house back from the 1950s and 60s is, it was just, about what, 4 or 5 stairs or something, not a huge long flight of stairs. And she just slipped a little bit and she thought that's weird. And she went, because she didn't slip. There was something biomechanically, her sense of balance or something was off. So she went to the doctor. That's when they saw the markers, cancer markers in her blood. Okay. So I was very close to my mom, and it really blew me away on many, many levels. And I was in law school at the time. I was at Boston College Law School. It was my 3rd year law school, and walking down the hallway, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody asked me, how you doing? And you know how you say, I'm doing okay. Even if you're not, you say it because you don't want to get into this. Maybe this is a stranger, or maybe you don't know him that well. Maybe you just don't have the time to get into really how you're feeling. And so, and I did that. But one time somebody said, "Hey, Kel, how you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm fine. I'm okay, but my mom just died." And boom, they self-disclosure, how you do that? Sometimes you disclose something and then they disclose something. It opens it. You open up and it opens them up. It's almost like they have permission now. And then they start telling you stuff and you said, "Oh, I can't remember who it was, but it's like, oh yeah, my brother died, or my uncle died. He was on a motorcycle or whatever, this and that." Something. I started helping people because I noticed that it helped me with the death of my mom by talking about it. And so I didn't study this. I went into a law firm. I was doing corporate and tax stuff, but I was doing this nights and weeks, on the side, people would call me up because they'd say, hey, call this guy Kelvin, here's his phone number. So, once a month, every couple of, months, I get a call, and then it was more frequent, more frequent, more frequent, and started helping people I didn't even know on the phone, just talking to them about death and dying. So then later I took some, classes, and I got certified and all this other stuff, but I just pretty much did this myself by figuring out what worked when in talking about death and dying with people. So that was in the 1980s. So since the 1980s, I've been inspired by my mom's death. And I talk about it here in the book a little bit at the beginning of this book. But what I also noticed was when I was talking about death and dying with people, if there were a lot of people, like 3 or 4 people in the group or something, as opposed to just 2 people, me and another person, then sometimes people would say, well, but no, that doesn't fit with my belief system about death and dying. They start getting into the religious and the cultural thing, and they start going like, well, but this is the way we think, and I thought, we need to, how can we talk about this? It's a very important thing because we're all going to die. We all know that, right? I mean, we're going to biologically shut off. The machine is going to shut off. We call that death, okay? How can we talk about it without getting into this stuff? Like, well, my belief is the right one, and your belief is the wrong one. So that's when I came up with these. I was talking to my buddy George, and we came up with these 4 main belief systems about death and dying. That's why the subtitle, so the title of the book is Overcoming the Fear of Death Through Each of the 4 Main Belief Systems. Now, the 4 main belief systems are not religious and not cultural, and I'm going to tell you what they are. But they underlie, you'll see that they underlie and support all the religious and cultural beliefs out there in the world. Everybody falls somewhere in one of these 4 beliefs, or a combo. Maybe you get combo platters too, okay? That's okay, right? Or hybrids, like, sure, right? Maybe this one, maybe that one. So here's the 4 beliefs, and we'll talk about each of them, okay? So the first belief is the science belief. So I came out of that school, this thing. This is where Kelvin Chin started out, right? The science belief, the belief that when the body shuts off, the brain and the mind are the same. That's the science belief. And that when the body shuts off, that's it. There is nothing. The mind does not continue, okay? That was my father's belief system his entire life. I'll tell you some stories about him in a sec. The second belief system, I call it the fear of continued existence. That's where you do believe that something is going to continue besides your body's not, obviously, but your mind's going to continue, or soul, spirit, consciousness. By the way, you'll hear me use that word mind a lot because, as I mentioned to you, some of you folks earlier, I'm teaching in 68 countries across the world. So I try to use English that's pretty straightforward, not too complicated, because sometimes English is the second, third, fourth language of some of the people I'm working with. So mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, awareness, you could substitute any of those. It's the same thing as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So second belief system, fear of continued existence. Belief that the mind will continue, but there's some fear. And we talked earlier before we started this talk, some of us were chatting, and the fear could be a lot of different things. Fear of punishment is a big one, but, could be other fears. Some Buddhists I've worked with, they're afraid they're going to come back as an insect or whatever, whatever. So you could have a fear of continued existence that you believe, that you believe that you're going to continue, but fears of all kinds. So I just call it generally the fear of continued existence. Okay. Third belief system that's out there is belief in an afterlife. In other words, the mind is going to continue after the body biologically dies, but no fear. So maybe you'll be looking forward to it. Heaven, afterlife. I use the word afterlife just because of a more general term, but people very often use the word heaven for the afterlife or whatever. Fourth belief system, reincarnation. That's the subject of this book, right? So reincarnation, past lives and future lives. Oh, you can come back again in a different body. What? You may be on the other side doing some soul planning. In other words, planning out your next life. You can actually try to make some stuff happen. I talk about that in that book. One of my memories that I had pretty clearly is interesting. That memory that popped up in me about in between, some people call it the in-between lifetime memories, happened when I was swimming last 2 Februaries ago, because I swim laps like 3 days a week. And if you ever done any repetitive kind of exercise, it could be jogging, rowing, could be bicycle or whatever, but swimming, you kind of get in, it's almost very meditative. It's almost you kind of space out a little bit and your mind just goes to wherever. And I had a glimpse into something when I was on the other side, at a memory when I was swimming. This lifetime, I was swimming just a year ago. But so those are the 4 belief systems, right? Science, belief, fear of continued existence, no fear, but believe in afterlife, and reincarnation. Everybody falls somewhere in there, you know. I think it's somewhere like a quarter of the world's population believes in reincarnation. It's a big segment of the population in the world. It's not huge in the United States, but it's huge worldwide. But everybody falls somewhere there, yeah. And you could be like I said, a fence sitter, like a hybrid. Like, I'm not sure. I'll maybe over the first one and the second one. I'm not sure. You know, whatever, right? And I talk about that with people. And so, as I mentioned to everybody who was here earlier, before we started, I do a free phone session worldwide with anybody about anything that I do. It's part of my nonprofit work, okay? Free initial phone session. And so I help people a lot with this one, because this one's a big one. The fear of death is a big one for a lot of people around the world. And you'd think that, well, they believe in reincarnation. Well, they fear, yeah, they can still have fears about death and dying. Absolutely. So, yeah. So let's talk about let's unbundle the 4 belief systems that we just laid out here, okay? And we'll take them one by one. Let's see. We'll take them one by one and we'll talk about a little bit. By the way, just 100,000 foot. I do these lectures to public groups like you, but I also do it to healthcare groups. And sometimes the doctors and nurses and healthcare providers, therapists and so forth may have their own fears about death and dying. But very often I'm doing a class with them to give them a perspective, a way to talk about death and dying with other people who don't believe the way they do. Because it's easy to talk to somebody who believes the way you do, and that they believe that, you know, the two of you have the same beliefs. But especially as healthcare providers, or, you know, other people in, you know, who are kind of professionals in or trust. I did one for a group of trust and estate lawyers, you know, people who are dealing with death and dying issues with patients and clients. But this helps them, this discussion that we're having today helps them have a way to talk with Buddhists. And they're not Buddhist. The lawyer or the doctor is not a Buddhist, but it gives them a way to talk about them without having to understand everything about Buddhism. You know, it's just a quick way. This book is kind of a quick way to give little tidbits of information on how to talk about these 4 different ways that people tend to look at death. So again, the science belief. So if you have the science belief, like my dad did, which, you know, brain, mind connected, brain dies, body dies, mind shuts off, that's it. It's one life, you're one and done, okay? That was my dad's belief system. Well, if you have that belief system and you really do, like my dad did, then you would have no fears about death and dying, because what's fear? Fear is the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness, isn't it? If you think about it, that makes sense, right? You anticipate you're going to be unhappy, so then you're, oh no, avoid that, right? So my dad really did have the first belief system, so he had no fear about death because his belief system was like, my body's shutting off, that's it, so I'm living my life, right? So people sometimes will come to me, very often they'll come to me from around the world and they'll say, oh, I have the first belief system. And I said, but you have a fear about death and dying, so let's talk about that. And they'll say, wow, but I'm not sure. Right? They're hedging their bets, right? They're like, what if I'm wrong? Right? Right? So that's a little bit different. That's not the same as my dad, right? My dad was like all in. No, that's my dad's favorite. I talk about it in my book. My dad's famous line: if he didn't even know you and you just ran into him, like, you came over to the house and you were talking to my dad or whatever, he would tell you right up and says, oh, death, just put me in the box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. That was his famous line. He would tell all my friends that when we were growing up. Put that, I'm in the box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. And he got a cigar hanging out of his mouth, my dad, anyway. He had a cigar hanging out of his mouth. Anyway, so, but if you're like many of the people who contact me from around the world, like, yeah, I have the first belief system, but I'm not sure. That's what I call the fear of uncertainty. And that's getting into the second belief system. It's a spillover. It's like you're a hybrid. You're a little bit of first and a second, but it's like fear because you're not sure. Fear of uncertainty, fear of the unknown, right? Not sure what's going to happen. Want to hedge my bets, right? Well, that fear can be, I help people deal with that fear, the second one, the fear of continued existence or fear of uncertainty, however you want to language that. Because sometimes, as we talked earlier, it could be a specific fear, like I'm afraid of being punished. But other times it could be like a fear of uncertainty, they just not know. To me, they're slightly different, but they fall into the same general kind of category belief system. And the way to deal with that, I help people deal with that by two-pronged approach. One is physiologically changing their biological chemistry, their brain chemistry, and I teach meditation. So Chelsea mentioned that in the intro in my bio. I've been teaching meditation for 50 years now, and I've taught thousands and thousands of people around the world. I taught the first meditation courses in the history of West Point Military Academy, up the road from here, not too far, right? How about 200 people there at West Point, all the cadets, the professors. The professors, if you don't know, West Point, it's the U.S. Army college, basically. It's a U.S. Army university. So you go in, you're 18 years old, whatever, you're a cadet, and you come out, you're an Army officer, and you're taught by, the professors are Army officers, okay? Captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, and so forth. So I taught all of them. The commandant learned, all the staff. I taught the librarian at West Point to meditate. Everybody learned. And then I taught the first meditation courses in the history of the U.S. Army in Korea. I was in all the U.S. Army bases throughout Korea, including on the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. The most stressful place I'd ever been on planet Earth. Talk about the air being thick, like you could cut it with a knife. You hear people use that expression. It was unbelievable. Corporations, schools, I've taught for many decades meditation, even on the side when I had my legal career. So that's one prong of the two-prong approach to help get rid of the fear of continued existence or the fear of uncertainty, is to change the brain chemistry, the cortisol level, the adrenaline, all the fight or flight hormones. You've heard of the term fight or flight response. All that stuff that we collect over a lifetime of too much fight or flight. Fight or flight is not a bad thing. It's a good thing if you're crossing the street out here and somebody's not paying attention and they run the red light. Your fight or flight turns on. Your heart rate kicks up. Your adrenaline pumps, and then blood goes to your big muscles so you can run or fight. It's a fight or flight, and you're going to run to the curb, saves your life. That's appropriate. That's good. Not when you're in a traffic jam, or not when you're late for an appointment. but that's what's going on in everybody. It's triggering when it shouldn't. So all the brain chemistry gets all out of whack. It gets imbalanced. So I know what the meditation that I teach does because I was a test subject when I was 19 years old. The reason I learned to meditate was because I was so stressed out. I was a sophomore at Dartmouth College, very high pressure place, and it was like, ugh. I thought I was going to flunk out, and I thought it was toast, as they say. And I learned to meditate, and it just turned my life around. But I was a test subject about 8 months later in the very first medical studies ever done in the ever published in the United States in 1971. 72, I think they were published. Anyway, and they took blood samples. So I know what it does. I know it changes the cortisol, the adrenaline, the lactic acid, and I can't remember all the other things that they were measuring, but those are the three that I remember from the blood panel. So that's one approach, changing the chemistry biologically. That's going to change us emotionally. It's going to make us feel stronger emotionally, okay? And then the other approach, the other aspect of the approach to help overcoming that fear of continued existence is more mental. It's more thinking. How are we thinking about it? And like I just gave you guys an example earlier. Okay, how are we thinking about that? You thought you're the first belief system, but you still have a fear. So that kind of thinking and my helping people think about what their belief system is a little bit more clearly, that clarification alone can start to help relieve some of the stress and the pressure on them emotionally. So it's basically the two-prong approach for the second, how to deal with the fear of continued existence, okay? Third belief system, no fear, we don't have to deal with that, worry about that one, right? But we'll come back and talk about that in a second. Of how to talk with other people who do believe in the third belief system, where belief in an afterlife, but there's no fear. And then reincarnation, again, if there's a fear associated with, like I kind of, it sounds funny, but seriously, I've worked with people who believe in reincarnation, and they're worried about what they're going to come back as. You know, it's like, am I going to come back as a mosquito or whatever? You know, I don't want to be, like, you know, I don't like rats, you know, like whatever, you know, or, you know, what am I going to come back at? So, those fears can be dealt with, again, the two-prong approach that I alluded to earlier. So the meditation helps reduce the cortisol levels and all that imbalances in the brain chemistry, but also understanding principles like free will and choice that I talked to you guys about when we talked about this book, and this, but that's one of the 67, well, it's about 3 or 4 of the 67 essays in here. I talk about free will, choice, and you can choose to not come back as a mosquito or not come back as a rat, or you could choose to come back as a mosquito, or you could choose to come back as a rat, I suppose. But you know, why would you? But you know, what's that? For the experience, exactly. Yes, well, exactly, because how long does the butterfly live? 2 weeks or something. Yeah, exactly. You could just come back for a quick, you're like, well, I'm gonna go check out the flowers, you know, and like, oh, maybe a butterfly, and then you go out, and then you can come back, and you can go back as a human later and say, oh, wow, that was pretty wild, you know, what you, no, exactly. No, I think, no, no, you're absolutely right, and I will give you, since you mentioned it, I'll just tell you right now, and we'll come back to this in a second. But in this book, I talk about choosing not to come back as a rat or a mosquito or a butterfly, but I maybe I didn't. I just don't remember it. But anyway, but I do remember coming back as an eagle in between human lifetimes. So I think that you know, we can progress from animals, I mean, humans, and I think cats, dogs, horses. I think a lot of animals who have a lot of contact with humans, I think they can make the jump to being humans at some point. But I'm a little bit weird, so if you haven't figured that already, I'm not. You know, I'm not totally straight line. I kind of go like this sometimes. And so came back as an eagle in one of the lifetimes, and I have explicit memories of some of the stuff I talk about in the book. But anyway, so you get the first belief system we talked about, my dad's belief, okay? We talk about that really, if you really believe that, you shouldn't have any fear of death and dying. We talked about the fear of continuing existence and the two-pronged approach on how to deal with that. The third one, let's talk a little bit about the third one, and I'm going to give you some tips, and then again, we'll open it up to questions in a minute. The third one was what? Belief in an afterlife, but no fear. So what I talk about in this book is I talk about near-death experiences. Have you ever heard that term? NDEs, right? And I start talking about NDEs. I introduce the idea of NDEs, near-death experiences, that some people have had. And I almost drowned once. I don't talk about my almost drowning experience in here. I try to make this book not about me, so I talk about other people's experiences. This one is all about me, but this one is not. I wanted my first book to be very educational and not do so much personal, although I talk about a couple of experiences that I've had in here, but mostly it's about other people. So I talk about the near-death experiences of two friends of mine, very close friends of mine. One I went to college with at Dartmouth, and then we actually roomed together at graduate school at Yale, a couple of years later. And he almost died when he was 8 years old. And he was, maybe 20 or something, 20 years old when he was telling me the story. And he almost died when he had his tonsils out. And so tonsils, how many people have had their tonsils out here, Yeah, a bunch of people. It's not considered a life-threatening surgery, Yeah, it just goes snip, snip, and then boom. And so, but what happened with him is my friend Henry, he came home, he was 8 years old, and his mom felt sorry for him, so she baked a whole ton of cookies, chocolate chip, Toll House cookies for little Henry, and some of them were baked a little bit too long, so he ripped his sutures out. Right? Okay. So now he's internally bleeding. He's lying on the living room floor on a carpet, and he's bleeding out. And so she calls the doctor, and she's obviously mom's freaking out. Calls the doctor. Doctor comes, looks at him. Says, not enough time to call an ambulance. He just picked him up, put both of them in this car, and drove them to the hospital. But the whole time, Henry was totally at peace. He told me he was on the ceiling. His mind, his consciousness, his soul, his spirit, was on the ceiling, looking down at his little 8-year-old body, going, "What's Mama son about? I feel good." He said, "I feel really fine, Mom." It's like, what are you, what? And the whole ride to the hospital, the doctor, what necktie he was wearing, what the nurse said to the doctor, all of that he recounted afterwards to his mom. Okay, near-death experience. Another friend of mine had a completely different near-death experience, and that's why I put these two examples in here, because they're so different from each other. There's a rage, and this one, my friend Jay, was in the ER, emergency room, hospital, and he exited his body, and he found himself in a star field. He said all of a sudden, and his body had flatlined. Okay, and so he had a very different experience. I won't give you the whole thing because it's fairly long. It's like 6 pages long or something, half a dozen pages. But he bottom line is he came slamming back into his body. He sat up in his room like in the Frankenstein movie. He just sat right up and he yelled. And there were like 6, 8, 10 doctors and nurses in the room at that point. And he, where am I? And what am I doing? And they all screamed because he was dead for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. So those of you who know anything about this, it's generally like 4 to 6 minutes with no oxygen and no brain activity. And that's it, 4 to 6. 20 minutes, that's like virtually unheard of. And this is recorded in the medical documents that this happened. And I've had dinner twice and lunch once with one of his doctors. So I know this has really happened, but that's a very unusual, that's a different NDE. Also, with the third belief system in here, I talk about visits from dead relatives and friends on the other side. And that can happen, though. How do we explain these things? I don't know. Has anybody ever had anything like that? Visit like that? No? Yeah, I mean, how do you?
In dreams.
In dreams, yeah, sometimes in dreams. That counts. Yeah. So dreams, or it can be not even explicit visits, it could be signs like getting feathers, or one of my students told me she told her dad before he died, and they kind of jokingly but seriously, she said, Dad, look, I don't want pennies and nickels. I don't want you to leave, like, leaving, I want quarters. So she finds quarters, because pennies, those people who are watching this from other parts of the world right now, so pennies are worth nothing here in the United States. So nobody picks pennies up on the ground. There's pennies everywhere. You'll be, let's leave them there, even nickels. But quarters, that's like a quarter of a dollar. You can get something with a quarter. And so she finds quarters, she increased the difficulty for it's like a diving test or something, like in the Olympics. She increased the difficulty for her father. Yeah, that's very difficult, quarters. So yeah, don't let that guy pick up that quarter there. It's for me, like their father's like whispering to the guy to go into the store, the other door. Yeah, exactly. Dollar bills are next. Exactly. Silver dollars, collectible silver dollars. Exactly. So, but I talk about these, there's different examples of this in this section of the book. And then recognition memories are something that I talk about in the book as a precursor. And I talk about them in this book too, because but in this book, I talk about it as a precursor, and I'll explain to you what I mean. A recognition memory is a precursor to maybe, you're never sure, for sure, maybe a precursor to a past life memory. So for example, true story, nobody would ever do this today. Listen to this. So when I was 5, 6 years old, my mom used to take us to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay, we drive in from the suburbs Saturday morning. I have a little sister, and my little sister we take it to my grandmom's, who lived like 4 or 5 blocks across the street from the Museum of Fine Arts in some 3-story walk-up apartment. My grandmother's babysitting. My father goes off and probably looking for new hubcaps for his car or something like that. He's going off to do a guide thing by himself, right? And my mom and I, we walk, back to the Museum of Fine Arts Saturday morning. We'd be there 15, 20 minutes before it opens up. We're the first people in with another 3 or 4 or 5 people. People didn't go to museums back then in the 1950s, It was just like, dusty places, school outing, we go there, but not on a weekend. So we go in there and my mom would say, okay, and we go in the lobby and my mom she'd go, okay, Kelvin, look at Mickey's, I had a Mickey Mouse watch. Look at Mickey's hands. When Mickey's little arm is on the 11 and his big arm is on the 12, I'll meet you back here. I'm 5, 6 years old. Can you imagine? You'd probably get arrested for like child endangerment today or something, Your kid would end up in some like downtown cell somewhere with something like, you got to go pick up your kid downtown. That I did that regularly with my mom. But the point is, with this recognition memory idea, is I would go wander around the Museum of Fine Arts by myself. And where would I go? I'd regularly go to 2 areas: the Egyptian mummies and the medieval armor. Why? I did not know. But I would go there, and it was like I was with my family. I'm like with 3,500, 4,000-year-old bags of dust. It's called a mummy, I'm like, but I felt like at home. It was weird. And now I know why, but then I didn't. But that's what I did. It was a thing. That's where I went. And now I know, because I was in the Crusades and I was an Egyptian priest a bunch of times, in ancient Egypt and this and that. I've had memories now. And I don't know exactly who I was, but I know that I have real clear memories of certain ceremonies, and so forth, as a high priest in ancient Egypt, in multiple lifetimes, not just once. So that's an example of a recognition memory. You know, or I have a friend with jewelry. That's a tough word to say. And I said, well, like what? And she says, rings. And I said, well, do you know what they look like in your mind's eye? And then she goes, yeah. And I said, well, go online. We got this thing called the internet now. Go online, see if you can find it. And then she goes online and she found one. And actually, the story is in here. And I'm just going to give you this much of the story because the story is like this long. But she goes in the internet, she finds the ring that she's looking for, that she's been in her mind's eye for decades. It's a serpent ring, and it wraps around your finger. And I say, well, look, and this is what I call following the breadcrumbs. And so I say, follow the breadcrumbs. So when did they make them? She says, well, they made them in 1st and 2nd century AD in Egypt, but they were sold in ancient Rome. They were very popular in ancient Rome. So she starts following those breadcrumbs, and she figured out who she might have been in ancient Rome, but not from the ring. But the ring was the beginning thing, and you read the story in here. It's called Josephine and Lucius is the story in here. Her name is Josephine in this lifetime, and Lucius is somebody that she thinks she was with in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago. So, so those are kind of the stories that I tell in this book to give people an idea of what is meant by those 4 different belief systems. And then if you're talking to other people who don't believe, who do believe maybe in reincarnation and you don't, you have some data points to talk to them from. Or somebody who you didn't know what an NDE was, now you do from reading the book, and you can talk to somebody who has that kind of belief system, okay, that you may not have had any experience or belief about. So this book is useful for that, for both those reasons, both individually helping people overcome their own fear of death, but also to talk to other people about death and dying. The one thing that I talk about in here that I talk about in great detail in this one again, but the one experience of my own that I talk about here was a memory of being a Carthaginian slave. I was a slave about 2,300 years ago on a warship, and I almost died. And the reason I picked that particular lifetime to talk about out of the couple of dozen lifetimes I remember, the reason I picked that one to talk about in this book is because instructionally, from a teaching standpoint, what I learned from that experience was that my mind was very powerful, and I willed myself to stay alive, being on a piece of wreckage on the Mediterranean in the middle of a war. I stayed alive. I willed myself to stay alive. So what did that teach me that's helped me today in Kelvin Chin lifetime in 20th, 21st century Earth is that my mind is very powerful, and that I could will myself to get myself together. This is a true story. Pull myself together 5 times to go into job interviews again, being laid off 5 times since I was 50 years old. And for those of you who are younger, I'm just warning you, there is ageism, age discrimination exists in the United States. Right? Right? And so to pull myself together, I accessed my knowledge about myself and the ability of my mind to pull myself together. I accessed that experience of almost dying on a piece of wreckage in the middle of the Mediterranean from 2,300 years ago to inform me about myself, because it's still me. I'm different, obviously, but it's the fundamental things are still there within me. And that helped me get a job 5 times since I was laid off 5 times since I was 50. All right? Very difficult. Those of you, anybody who's ever been through it, my heart goes out to you. Okay, so that's the purpose of this book, really, in a nutshell, is how can I help people reduce their fears so that they can live life more fully in the present? That's the summary point of that book. And that's kind of true of all my books, all my teaching, is to help people in the present, because we're in the continual present. It's now 2024, right? Right? And it's continual present, isn't it? I always have to check myself. What year is it again? 2024. And I call it the continual present because it's always changing. It's continual. It's the present, but you ever hear of this guy? He's a comedian, and he calls himself, I don't know what the guy. It's probably some Jewish guy. I don't know, but he calls himself Swami Beyond Ananda. That's his stage name, and he still does acts every once in a while. If you YouTube him, you'll find him. Swami Beyond Ananda. So it's Beyond Ananda. It's a joke, right? But so he did this thing. I saw him do this shtick where he's going. When it was around New Year's, and he was going, you got to be in the present. Oh, you just missed it. You missed it again. Oh, you missed it again. Because the present is continually changing, right? So that's what I teach. How can we live more in the continual present with less fear, less suffering, more happiness, more contentment, and more inner peace? So let's open it up to questions, okay? Yeah. Questions, anything we talked about? Go ahead. Okay. Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier. I'll prime the pump a little bit, and you guys can kick me some questions about the punishment issue. And people are worried about, okay, I die. Am I going to be punished? And my experience, again, I think you've kind of pulled enough tidbits out of what I said that I've had experiences of on the other side, and I don't have to have an NDE. I don't have to have a near-death experience to experience being on the other side anymore. So I can, I talk about the veil, the V-E-I-L, the veil between here and there. The veil is pretty transparent for me, but I choose to be here. I'm not living over there. I'm gonna be there soon enough, but my experience is that there is no structural punishment. What do I mean by that? Structurally, there's no hell like some of the religious institutions say. But there's no structural hell. There's no place you have to go to. Can you be punished? Yeah. Can you be punished on this side? Yes. You hurt somebody. Can they punish you in different ways? Sure they can. And so in the same way, that can happen on the other side. Okay? It's possible. So there's consequences to one's actions. Nobody gets a hall pass. Nobody gets a free pass. Okay? So there are consequences because nobody ever forgets. We talked about that briefly, when I talk about one of the essays in this book, the forgiveness essay, that nobody ever forgets. Everybody remembers stuff. And so that means for eternity. And the last time, I checked, eternity is a really long time, So do good things to good people, do good things to people. They'll remember that too. Right?
I just want to mention something.
Yeah.
I'm a nurse, I retired now.
Okay.
And I worked with pediatrics most of the time. And I had a 13-year-old patient that had lupus. He got extremely ill. And he happened to be Asian. And he basically died in my hands.
Wow.
And the very first patient that had died, and as a child, beautiful human being, so young and so wise. And I think he felt like he was dying, and he felt my let's call it fear, the fear that he was going to die in front of me. And he actually said to me, "I'm old." And I got, I thought, okay, my scientific brain said, he's a Buddhist. He was born into that, but he wasn't.
He was
He was a Christian Catholic.
Catholic.
And he said to me, in other words, it's okay, let me die, I'm old. at 13 years old.
Wow,
And that was an experience that's why I'm sort of hybrid. I'm going like, maybe there is reincarnation,
yeah,
even though my scientific brain is saying, maybe you learn that from your parents.
right,
So that's something that brought me.
yes,
And to this day, I always have that doubt,
yeah,
no fear of that. I don't
Right.
know that. I'm not afraid of that. But that brought me, into that area of,
yeah.
do I wanna come back?
Right, right. Well, that's a beautiful share. Thank you for sharing that. 13-year-old,
30-year-old.
and he said, I'm old. I'm old.
He's old.
He's an
Yeah.
unsafe, can it be possible?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, he wasn't reincarnation. In other words,
Yes,
he was ready to go because
Yes.
he's old.
yes.
So I'm like, don't worry about me.
Yeah, he was ready to go. He was okay with it. Yeah, thing is, there are, so one of the stories I talk about in here, I talk about a young boy, he's 2 years old, he's in Louisiana, if I'm not mistaken. And there are YouTubes of this boy, so you can actually YouTube his name when you get it from the book, you YouTube it. And you see all kinds of stuff that I don't even get into in the book. I didn't want the book to be all about him, so I have a chapter on section on him. 2 years old, very, very Christian family, does not believe in reincarnation at all. And this little 2-year-old is waking up screaming every night, 4 or 5 nights a week. I'm on fire, I'm on fire, a little boy, little man on fire, little man on fire. Calls himself a little man because he's 2 years old, but he's a man in the experience. And then fast forward, the father, who's very devout Christian fundamentalist, doesn't believe in any of this stuff. The wife is the mother's a little bit more flexible, but pretty much of the same ilk. The father starts researching this stuff, starts getting so many data points. The son actually gives the name of the ship, Natoma. Natoma is not a regular name, Natoma. And then he finds out that there's an aircraft carrier in the US Pacific Fleet in the Second World War. And then, and the boy's name is James Leininger. That's his 20th century name. But he's been telling his parents that I think he said he's the third James. And they're like, what are you talking about, third James? Turns out the guy he's saying he was the fighter pilot killed in the Second World War was also named James. But he was, I think, James Jr. So he was the second, the one who was killed was, his father was also named James. So anyway, figured it out and then corroborated it with other pilots who were still alive. There was one pilot who was his wingman, who was off on this, who was flying next to him, and he corroborated exactly how James, whatever the guy's name James was in the Second World War, that his plane, his engine got hit with a piece of either a bullet or shrapnel or something, and then his plane went down. So, but that's an example of, a kid, he's 2, 3, 4 years old, having more and more of these experiences over a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period. Fast forward, he was a teenager, or maybe he was 12 years old. I saw this on YouTube where he's talking about going to a memorial service at the Naval Museum, the Nimitz Naval Museum. So Chester Nimitz was the head admiral of the Pacific Fleet, and he's from Fredericksburg, Texas. Nimitz was born there, grew up there, and so forth. That's where the Nimitz Naval Museum is, in Nimitz's hometown. There was a memorial service for that aircraft carrier, the Natoma. This guy James, kid, he's now 12 years old. Maybe this happened 10 or 12 years ago or something. He's 12 years old. He goes with his parents, and they get out of their car and they're going to the ceremony at the museum. And he sees all these old, he says, that's Jimmy. He looks so old. because he remembers Jimmy when Jimmy was 18 years old, a
Mm.
fighter pilot on the aircraft carrier. And now Jimmy is like 90 something. Okay. And he sees Billy, there's Billy. Right? Pretty wild, right?
What do you think of deja vu, people that?
So deja vu, I think is a real thing. And I think I think it has different variations, we'll call it. So sometimes I think it can be explained away from a scientific standpoint as, well, the brain just kind of had a little thing and, we forgot and then you remember. I think some of those probably could be, but I think deja vu, to me, deja vu on steroids is what I call it, are recognition memories, where you go to a place, you've never been there before, and you check in with your siblings or your parents or your grandparents or who knows what you have. We've never been here? No. And you go there, I don't know about South Dakota, but there's something very familiar about it. I have a friend who she used to be a model, and she was from Texas, and many decades ago, she flew to London to do some runway modeling, and she never been to Europe before. And she got out of the plane in London, and she's walking around London. She just knew she'd been there before.
And
So-
also not only the memories, and almost like you are there at that time, and you realize I'm here, but at that time, but the feeling is, for me, that's even more important than the job.
Yeah, the feeling, exactly.
Something
The things we have been.
it cannot be expressed.
Yes.
It's the feeling.
Yeah, very difficult to express, but it's a very real, it's a very real experience, this feeling, yeah. So some people, exactly. It can come in with these recognition memories, it can come in feelings, they can come in my friend Josephine's case, an artifact, a ring,
And
a knowingness.
Because
sometimes.
I know in Istanbul where to go, where the old market was, how to go around. It was my first time in the world. And then I realized, okay, they've had that in many countries, but in Istanbul it was so amazing. But very, very old place, of course.
So, go ahead.
Sometimes when, because I do get a lot on the mall, but when you try to think further ahead, it blanks out.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you can get glimpses almost.
Correct.
Yeah, glimpses, and then it's almost like the lens gets foggy or something.
Right.
Yeah, that can happen too. To your points, these 2 points, I was talking to somebody recently, and this happened to him, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago or something, maybe 30 years ago, but he was in France at the Louvre, famous art museum, right? And he was there with his father, and they were hearing one of the, museum docents was talking about a certain painting on the wall. And then he doesn't know where it came, he started speaking in French, and he doesn't speak French. This is an American guy, started speaking in French, telling the docent at the Louvre Museum that, no, that's incorrect. It actually was in this year, and this is what he did. And he said it in French. And then he kind of came to, and his father was staring at him like, speak French, right? And he, in perfect French, he was correcting the docent. And then another museum docent came up and said, actually, what he said was right. Yeah. It was like off by, I can't remember, 15 or 20 years, 1700, yada, yada, whatever, when the painting was, but, where does that come from, right? So I've had some experiences like that where I know certain languages that Kelvin Chin has never studied.
But scientifically, the medical community, the science community, they still haven't discovered all the capabilities of our brain. 1/3 maybe. So, who knows?
Exactly,
Let's go back to
exactly.
that.
exactly.
We would-
Yeah, and yeah, and so all of this openings and, you know, there's an analogy I use in one of my essays in this book. I call it the 100 million room castle analogy. And our mind is like 100 million room castle that, just pick a big number, you know, 100 billion, 100 trillion, 100 million room, whatever. But most people live their lives in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 rooms. And I don't get caught up in the number, but it's just a small number of rooms. And then they die, and that's it. And what I do in my work is help people open up more of the rooms in their castle of their own mind. Well, then that changes in a unique way to each individual, because everybody's making their own choices in their life. But I give people the tools to do that, so then they can live their life in a different way, hopefully with more peace and contentment and more creativity, quite frankly, because you're not so limited, right? 100 million versus 3 or 4 rooms, right? That's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Something weird happened to me, so.
Yeah.
Partner,
Mhm.
he passed away last year.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh,
And so I met him in college, but he was overcoming the grieving for his brother because his brother committed suicide.
Ooh.
Like a couple of months before we met.
ooh,
So I never met him. I used to go with him to the cemetery, put flowers there, and I always used to see his picture in his car because he kept the funeral, picture, like on the, in front of the steering wheel.
yeah, right there.
But he
Yeah,
had it there, so I was like very familiar with his, like the way he looked.
yeah.
But one time he asked me, can you drive my car? So I was driving, and then all of a sudden I look at the rear mirror and I see him sitting in the back. And
So
he's
his
like,
brother.
yeah, and he's like relaxed like this
Wow.
and looking out, and he says to me, oh, just tell him not to stress about me because I'm okay.
Yeah,
But he committed suicide.
yeah,
So this was like a big
Yes.
thing for the family
Yeah.
because they're like Catholic, and they only believe whoever does that, they're gonna be.
right.
So that's when, my partner, he was like super concerned about it. He said, I don't want my brother like to go hell. So I was like,
Wow.
always telling him, don't think like that, you know,
Wow.
it's not a sin. I mean, I had my own idea of it.
Yeah.
But it happened to me once, he told me this. It happened to me one time again when I went to his house. I was sitting in his living room and I saw him laying down on the sofa. And
Wow.
he said that he sees now the family have accepted that he's gone. And he's enjoying now everyone seeing the way they're taking life now.
Good.
So I was
That's
like,
beautiful.
what I get in this, because I never
Yeah.
met him.
Yeah,
He was talking to me.
Yeah.
And this made me to say, oh, my brother was so much like you, like personality wise.
wow.
Hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. That's really beautiful. Yeah, you're so blessed and fortunate to experience. it. Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
wish now I could see Desmond because I miss him.
yeah,
But I
Your boyfriend,
haven't- Because you go, because you have to go, no.
Yeah.
And I kind of like talk to him, I tell him, you know, show me something, do something, so I can sense if you're around or not.
but nothing.
No, because he did something really bad. I mean, it's a very, very long story. And
Okay.
I don't want to get into my life.
Okay, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. But let me comment about that. So just to be clear, so what she was saying is that her boyfriend's brother, she has seen him since he died a number of times, but her boyfriend tragically died a year ago. Heart goes out to you. But he has not visited you. That's the thing. People wonder about this, and I've had that same experience. So sometimes, you know, people visit, sometimes they don't. My mom and dad, I've had visitations from them, and then not, etc. Some of my clients have had visitations from my father, and not me, right? Yeah. And remember, what did I tell you my father's belief system was out of this?
Scientific.
The science one, the first one. He thought, that's it, man. It's like, no. Yeah, and he he visited one of my clients in Ohio. I'll tell you that in a second. But I should finish this. That, yeah, that it just, you don't know, there's no, it's not like, oh, he doesn't love you or whatever. Don't draw those kind of incorrect conclusions, because the thing is, like his brother told you, now he's cool with the fact that everybody's comfortable. They're off doing stuff. They're busy on the other side. That's my experience. They're not just sitting around like in the cartoons that I used to watch when I was a kid, you know what I mean? They're up in the clouds, they're playing the harps, you know, they don't have anything to do except play the harp, you know? No, we're still alive, is my experience on the other side. And people are still, now we don't have a biological body, but we still are identifiable. So you still remember who you were. You still, your mind goes with you. So everything about your mind still, you know, just you carry that with you for eternity, but your body doesn't go. And so you still can have experience and so forth. And when you think something, I mean, you could think a library and you could theoretically create this North Bergen Free Public Library, and the other side, you could think that and create that in your, because you're a mind and you're energy. And so what are you creating? You're creating an energy form. Very not exactly like in dreams, but you know, in dreams, those are energy forms. You know, I'm lying in a bed in, you know, Pennsylvania at my friend's house. You know, normally I live in Los Angeles. But you know, I'm if you checked on me, had a camera on me, Kelvin Chin is still lying in the bed. But in my dreams, you know, my images of this and images of that, those are all energetic, obviously. They're not, you know, they're not physical in that sense. But back to this experience of a client, my dad visiting a client of mine a couple of years ago. I got a text message from one of my students, and he said, your dad visited me last night, I think. So that, I'm like, what? So, you know, you get a text message like that, you don't text back. You just pick the phone up and call the person, right? So I called him and he answered the phone. Guy name is Joseph. He answered the phone and I said, what happened? He said, well, and he's in his 50s, he's about 50 years old. He said, for my whole life, I've had really vivid dreams, very clear dreams, and he remembers them when he wakes up, so forth. And he said, last night, he was flying, Joseph, was the pilot flying a World War II bomber over the ocean. And this young Asian officer came from the rear of the plane up to the cockpit, and they were talking about hydraulic fluids, so the fluids in the engines and so forth. And he didn't know, Joseph did not know that my dad, not only was he was a mechanical engineer, but he had a specialty in hydraulic fluids, okay? This very specific, yeah. And my dad was also, now he did know from this book, he was reading this book, so he did know from one of the little paragraphs in here, I mentioned my dad was in World War II, and he was in bombers, but he didn't know about the hydraulic fluid thing at all. And so my dad, well, so then this young Asian officer comes up, they're talking about hydraulic fluids and how's the fluids, everything's fine, okay, great. And then the young Asian officer said to Joseph, he looked at them and he smiled and he said, you're afraid of death, aren't you? This is in his dream. And then Joseph said, how do you know that? I've only told 6 people in my life that I'm afraid of death. I don't tell anybody that. And I just told the 6th person about 3 weeks ago. And the young Asian officer said, oh, you mean my son, Kelvin? Yeah, pretty crazy, right? Yeah. And so then I found this picture in my iPhone of my dad when he was 21 years old in his Army uniform, his Army Air Force uniform. He's holding a cigarette as a prop in it. This is like, he's holding a cigarette. This is like a professionally taken photograph, you know. He's holding a cigarette, he's got his Army uniform on. And I sent it to Joseph. He said, that's the guy. That's the uniform he's wearing. That's his face. That was the guy in my dream. Yeah, crazy. And I sent him a picture of a B-29 bomber. That's what my dad worked on in the Second World War in India and China when they were bombing Japan. And he said that was the plane he was flying. Joseph was flying in his dream, B-29. Crazy, right? So, I didn't believe any of this stuff, like full circle. I said this at the beginning. I didn't believe any of this stuff. I didn't believe in heaven. I went to church. I went to a congregational church, Christian church. But, I went because my parents said I had to go. So, I heard the stories. I just thought there were stories and stuff until I started having these experiences. Anything else? Yes, yes.
What is that, according to my experience, that the most religious people are the people that are more afraid of dying and death and the process.
Yeah, why are the most religious people the most afraid?
They don't like it, they don't appreciate it when you say, I'm not afraid of dying.
Yeah.
Or they realize that they cannot do the operation. How come it happened to me with a painter that went to paint my house? It was, I didn't say anything, but he realized, I guess, that I wasn't afraid, and he said, after he talked about religion and everything, how come you're not afraid of dying? I
Right.
said, why? And he was so angry, and what do you think?
I think that a couple of
Because if they go back to God, so why are you afraid?
Right. Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think that one is that, first of all, institutions, especially religious institutions, but other institutions too, political institutions, but religious in this case, religious institutions use fear a lot, right? And they use fear as a motivator, right? You scare people enough and you get them to believe a certain way. And then what does that lead to? Control. And you can control the people's behavior and so forth and so on. And so I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, and then the other part of it, which is related, but it's slightly different, is people like it, they're looking for what's called confirmation. They want confirmation that their belief is correct, and their insecurity about whether it's correct makes them even more pushy. Right, aggressive, exactly. More aggressive, but that's a red flag to me. That's always the red flag. The more pushy, the less confident. Right?
Like they don't want to hear the truth, or they don't want to accept, they're afraid of hearing that.
They don't think of it as the truth. They think of it as what they're thinking is the truth, and they want you to agree with them to make them feel good about what their belief is, because essentially, really deep down inside, they're not sure.
They know, like they know there's no right.
Yeah.
But they don't want to make it,
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
Everybody to say.
So I was saying, if you want, the books are $10 each. If anybody wants to pick one up, there you go. Yeah. Go.
Thank you so
Good
much.
to meet you. Take care. We'll see you. And they're also available on Amazon. Yeah. Oh, the meditation I teach is very easy technique. It's not your usual concentrate. It's not controlling the mind. It's not trying to clear your mind of thought.